So Micah didn't play edge rusher at all at Penn State, but he did in high school. And from the people I've talked to, including coaches at Penn State, they said that there was no question he could have played edge rusher at Penn State. They just needed him at middle linebacker or at weak side linebacker.
We are the Mac and Mac guys. John McClone and Jody McClone here on Birds 365. All right, time to do a deep dive on the opposition, going behind opposition lines. Here to give us some insight on the Eagles' opponent on Monday night, the Dallas Cowboys, from The Athletic, and also his podcast, About Them Cowboys. I always like to know the podcast when I like the name. I got to tell you, I like the name, John. Jon Machota here with us on Birds 365. How are you, John?
I'm doing well, guys. Thanks for having me on again.
Hey, John, good to have you back. I guess we'll start with the Cowboys' health. They're banged up. You have some other issues down there as well, Lyle Collins suspension. So where are they health-wise coming into this Monday night game?
Well, so I think the biggest concern, probably from an Eagles standpoint, would be Amari Cooper. He bruised his ribs late in that game against the Chargers. And he didn't go to the blue medical tent. He didn't go into the locker room. He kind of stood on the side. It looked like he was about to come back in if they needed him to. They ended up settling for that 56-yard field goal, and luckily for them, it went in, so that he didn't need to come back in the game. But he was very limited yesterday when we were at practice, just did some individual stuff. But he did say on a local radio station here yesterday afternoon that he plans on playing Monday night. And I always anticipated that just because this game is so big for them. I mean, the way the Cowboys schedule is, playing the Eagles early in the season, most of their NFC East games are at the end of the year. This game just means so much. So I anticipate Amari Cooper playing. I'd be surprised if he didn't. But in terms of other guys that, Carlos Watkins, defensive tackle, who's kind of rotated in, he's already been ruled out. Dorrance Armstrong, one of their backup defensive ends, he's already been ruled out. Ty Nsekhe, who's their swing tackle, veteran offensive tackle, he's been ruled out. They are getting Randy Gregory back from the COVID-19 reserve list, so that's a positive for them. He's their starting right defensive end and probably their best pass rusher now with DeMarcus Lawrence out. So that's kind of where they're at right now. And then there's Keanu Neal, who was just recently put on it's every week with the Cowboys. It seems like there's a new player put on that reserve COVID list. Now, what's different with Keanu Neal, though, is that he did not test positive. He's a close contact. So there's a chance he has to be quarantined for 5 days as long as he continues to test negative. The fifth day would be Sunday, so he could technically play on Monday, but he will not have practiced all week. But with him knowing Dan Quinn so well, I can imagine as long as he's cleared to play Monday, he'll play.
Let me ask you about Neal, because he was a guy who drew a lot of interest across the league when he became a free agent during the offseason, including some here in Philadelphia, at least from Eagle fans. I don't know how interested the Eagles were or weren't, and they were where the conversations led. He ended up signing with the Cowboys, a little bit of a positional change. How's he played the first 2 weeks? How has that gone, his addition to the Cowboy defense?
Yeah, it's gone well. I mean, he's played the most snaps out of any linebacker on the roster, and when they signed him, you thought he'd be a factor, but a lot of us thought when they signed him, he's going to help out at safety. Safety's been such a weakness for the Cowboys, seemingly for the better part of the last decade. And so it seemed like this made sense. They got Dan Quinn. Why not go and get this guy that, Dan Quinn coached over in Atlanta, and it was a key piece for them. And then he comes to the Cowboys, and they're like, no, we're playing him at linebacker. And it was kind of like, all right, we'll believe that when we see it. And then he keeps lining up at linebacker, and he's been very good these first 2 games. He's a key piece for them. Obviously, with Micah Parsons playing well, those have been their top 2 linebackers. It is probably their deepest position on defense, so that's helped. But it's just very clear that he's kind of like an extension of Dan Quinn because he knows what Dan Quinn's looking for. And so, he makes that move from safety to linebacker mainly because the NFL is changing. You need your linebackers to be more like safety. They have to be able to cover. And so that's what he does well. He's been a good addition for this team. There's no question about it. And the Cowboys just don't spend big in free agency, but there's no question that he was their most significant addition in free agency, and he's lived up to the billing so far.
John, let's stick on the defensive side of the ball. You mentioned DeMarcus Lawrence. Obviously, he's on the injured reserve. That's probably the Cowboys' best defender, I would think, still. How much has Micah Parsons' role changed since that injury? Have they moved him to more of a pass rushing type role? I know people were speculating about that. Maybe that's the way they would have to go. Has it changed that dramatically?
It has. I mean, last Wednesday, just Demarcus Lawrence was just doing a routine drill, individual drill during practice, and ended up breaking a bone in his foot. And so it's not season ending. I mean, he'll be back, but it probably won't be for another couple months. And so after that practice, Dan Quinn went up to Micah Parsons and was like, Micah, we need to do something different here against the Chargers to have some success, especially with DeMarcus being out. You have edge rushing ability. You think you can do that just straight up for the entire game? And he was like, yeah, if that's what you want me to do, for sure. So Micah didn't play edge rusher at all at Penn State, but he did in high school. And from the people I've talked to, including coaches at Penn State, they said that there was no question he could have played edge rusher at Penn State. They just needed him at middle linebacker or at weak side linebacker. So because of that, that's kind of where it fit too with the Cowboys. But playing against the Chargers, that's all he did was play edge rusher, 39 snaps, and he played well. Now, I do think that there'll be some more of that against the Eagles, but this is going to be the third different type of quarterback that the Cowboys are going to go against. And so, so on practice yesterday, Micah Parsons didn't do anything with the linebackers. He was with the edge rushers the entire time. And so I'm kind of like, are you showing your cards here, or is this all a play because he's going to go back to line? Because for me personally, and obviously I'm not a coach, I would rather have him at linebacker against Jalen Hurts, because if he's rushing upfield, Jalen Hurts has that mobility to totally kind of take Micah Parsons out of the game in terms of let him rush upfield and then he can break outside. So it remains to be seen, but there's just no question that this is just a defender that the Cowboys have not had in a long time. And he has become kind of a Swiss Army knife where you don't know where he's going to be from down to down. And it's made things very interesting for this defense.
John, let me ask you about motivation, because my partner Johnny Mack and I were talking about it in the first hour of today's show about Doug Peterson wearing the Beat Dallas T-shirt to his press gathering yesterday, and whether that's going to help motivate the Cowboys because they're ticked off because it's bulletin board material, or motivate his own team by saying, do you guys realize how big a game this is? Dallas here in this town. It means a lot. You new guys might not understand it, but let me lay it out for you. So the Eagles are playing that game. Can the Cowboys benefit this week? Because I heard about it on the broadcast last night with Troy Aikman. I heard about it with Michael Irvin after the game. Everybody's back in Dallas this week because it's Wall of Fame night, and Jimmy Johnson's going in. Now, I'm old enough to remember Cliff Harris and Drew Pearson. The Cowboy players don't know any of that. How motivated they really going to be, because they're honoring guys who were stars and gone before they were ever born in the National Football League. What's the motivation like for the Cowboys this Monday night?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I was actually just talking about this yesterday with another reporter. To answer your question, it'll be that it's Monday night and it's the big stage. That's how it is for these players. But so we leave. We had our media availability yesterday, and we're talking to CeeDee Lamb, and just the way CeeDee Lamb talks about Jalen Hurts, they are legitimately really close friends. And so we leave. We talk to CeeDee for about 10 minutes. When we leave there, I'm just kind of like, you just never heard guys talk about an opponent, especially on a rival like that. Yeah. And it just was this is a guy that when Jalen Hurts transferred from Alabama to Oklahoma, CeeDee Lamb was all about it. He was like, you can stay at my place until you find a place. He stayed on his couch for a little bit. It was just all about hey, let's get on the same page and let's just have success. And they've stayed close ever since. And CeeDee Lamb genuinely wants to see Jalen Hurts have success. Now, obviously it's not against the Cowboys, but to play them twice a year, these guys are close. They're good friends. And so because of that, I agree. I don't think that they're going to care about the Jimmy Johnson or Cliff Harris or Drew Pearson stuff, but they do care about primetime games Monday night. And then the fact that, and this is an interesting thing CD brought up too, is he just kept talking about, I just can't wait to go against the Eagles now that with Dak, because when they played the Eagles last year, they didn't have Dak, and he's just excited for the possibilities of what they can be with him. But, and then to your other point about the shirt, I mean, several guys were asked about it, but they just didn't really seem like they really cared that much. I guess if it would have said like an expletive or something like F Dallas or something, maybe they would have had more. But the way they kind of took it was like, well, yeah, they want to beat us and we want to beat them. So I didn't think it was a big deal.
Yeah. By the way, it's interesting, John, because we were talking to Jalen Hurts yesterday up here. He said similar things about CD Lamb, and it's interesting because you have all the Alabama guys as well. Right. Jalen's in both camps, and they love each other. And they're Jalen Reagor's from Texas and near Dallas. His father, Monte Reagor's down there. Jalen himself is from Texas, but South Texas. Yeah, you see the connection between everybody. And, one thing I'm looking forward to is Devontae Smith. Hopefully I'll talk to him today. Trayvon Diggs. Trayvon Diggs is, to me, he's been one of the most improved playmakers in the NFL over the first couple of weeks. How much of an improvement have you seen from Trayvon Diggs?
Yeah, it's been significant. And, Mike McCarthy often talks about seeing this jump from guys from their first to their second year. And I don't think there's any better example on this Cowboys roster than Trayvon Diggs. And so we see it on the field, but it was another thing last week to actually hear Amari Cooper talk about it when Trayvon Diggs wasn't even the topic of the conversation. He just mentioned, he's like, Trayvon Diggs is 2 to 3 times better than he was last year. Like, there's just no question about it. Obviously Diggs and Cooper go against each other all the time in practice. And the interesting thing down here for Cowboys fans is that, for a long time, they had Byron Jones as their top corner. And Byron Jones is a good player. And obviously he was paid like one by the Dolphins. But the difference is that Byron Jones wouldn't get the big interceptions where Trayvon Diggs will get those interceptions. The other part of it, though, is that you could probably bust a big play from here or there on Trayvon Diggs because he's willing to take a gamble here or there where Byron Jones wouldn't. So it's kind of like, all right, Cowboys fans, you wanted a defensive back that made plays. Well, here you go. But you're going to have to take some risks with it too, which to me personally, that's the type of defensive back I'd want anyway. And that's the thing with Trayvon is that he will, there's a route that he ran last week. And I say route because he was running the route on Keenan Allen. It looked like, obviously he's defending Keenan Allen, but he ran a route to intercept this pass. And it just was on this underneath throw that you just don't see too many DBs pick him off. And so he's certainly a guy that teams have to be aware of. He was outstanding against Mike Evans in week 1. Tom Brady was having success throwing to just about everybody other than Mike Evans. So yeah, there's no question that he's significantly better than he was last year.
All right, Jon Machota, I need you to answer a question for me on last week's Cowboy game because I just didn't understand this. Late in the game, the Chargers driving, they scored the go-ahead touchdown on a play that is called after the fact an illegal shift. I thought illegal shift was a pre-snap penalty, that the referee's job was to blow the whistle and stop the play. They didn't. They allowed the play to take place. Chargers get a touchdown, then they go back and go, oh, no, wait a minute, illegal shift. How did that work?
That's a good question. I heard after the game that the reporters that cover the Chargers tried to get someone to meet with one of the officials to try and get a quote from them about that particular instance. And I don't know that they ever did. And you bring up a good point because that really left you scratching your head. And there was another play down there where Micah Parsons got a sack on Justin Herbert, but the ball was already out of Herbert's hand. They said he was in the grasp, and it was just, there were some plays back down. It clearly was not a great day for the officials. And if you live on social media, unfortunately, like I do, that was a big topic. I saw that quite a bit after the game. Chargers fans were pretty annoyed by that. And so, no, there's no question that there were some head scratching calls in that game, and certainly more against the Chargers in the final minutes. There were a couple early against the Cowboys, but that's to be whatever. But yeah, that final drive, there's no question that I thought what you were going to ask me about is why they settled for a 56-yard field goal and didn't try and get more. That left on the Cowboy side, that left all of us scratching our head. But yeah, I don't think it was a great game for the officials that day in Los Angeles.
Well, I'll go down that route. And John, why did they?
Thank you, John.
Yes, why did they settle for the 56-yard field goal? We hear things. Mike McCarthy had a ton of success in Green Bay, but obviously there's a lot of people who say Aaron Rodgers, Mike McCarthy, and it didn't end well. Things haven't been terrible, but they haven't been great in Dallas since he's been there. Why are they settling? Where is Mike McCarthy in this space, in this new age of modern football? Is he a guy sort of left behind in the old school? How has he been framed in Dallas?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it's funny because on our podcast right after the game, we got criticized for being like too negative, even though it was a win, because half the podcast we talk about like, how did you not run at least another play? How are you settling for 56 yards?
Uh-huh.
So there's been plenty of those issues, for the last year and a half where you're just kind of like, I don't know. It just seems like this game needs to be managed better in the final minutes, because really that comes down to Mike, because I don't think the game has necessarily passed him by. And even if it did, it kind of doesn't even matter with this current, the way the coaching staff set up, because he's not in charge of the offense. Like Kellen Moore is in charge of doing that. Kellen Moore is calling all the plays. And on the defensive side, that's Dan Quinn's baby. Dan Quinn is the one handling that. So Mike is the one that, is doing kind of the CEO walk around type head coach stuff. And so when there are clock management issues late in games and certain decisions like that, obviously that falls on him. So I'd say right now, Cowboys fans as a whole were ready, obviously, to move on from Jason Garrett. So I would say that because Mike McCarthy won a Super Bowl, people will point back to that. But he's in a period right now where clearly that honeymoon stage is over. And it's kind of like, all right, fans aren't stupid. They see this roster the Cowboys have. And we mentioned earlier in the show, the injuries they have. They still have a ton of good players, particularly on offense. And to play in this division that's not going to be great again. Like, the expectations are to not only win the NFC East, but it's to get in the playoffs and make a run. And if they don't do that, everyone's going to, the blame, I shouldn't say all of it, but a lot of that blame is going to go on Mike McCarthy, especially from the fan base.
All right. I want to follow up on McCarthy and Kellen Moore. We covered the last 5 minutes of the game quite well. Questionable penalties, made long field goal, worked out for the Cowboys. First 55 minutes of the game, best player on the field for the Dallas Cowboys was Pollard, not Ezekiel. He made the big plays. He made the chunk plays and the like. And this is not the first time we've seen this out of the Cowboy offense. Do the powers that be who are going to do the play calling on Monday night say, all right, let's do this again? Or do you say, we could get even more chunk plays if we give it to Pollard more often than we give it to Zeke? How is the dispersity of the running game going to go Monday night for the Cowboys?
So as negative as we were being in our post-game podcast, I will say the most positive thing that I continue to point out is that if you're a Cowboys fan, the thing you need to be the most excited about is just how much Kellen Moore is willing to change things up from week to week. It isn't the same game plan from week to week. And it's the same thing with Dan Quinn on defense. And that's been a breath of fresh air. And so because of that, I can't even tell you that necessarily Tony Pollard will get the same workload, because these first two games, the game plans have been completely different in both of them. It's not like Tony Pollard had some great practice last week and they were like, you know what, we need to get Tony more touches. They got Tony more touches because that worked with the way that the Chargers were playing defense, mainly leaving their two high safeties to really kind of, hey, if you're going to beat us, you're going to have to dink and dunk and run the ball underneath, because we're not going to have Dak throw for 400 or 500 yards against us. And which was the opposite game plan. When you're the Cowboys, you're not going to be able to run against that Tampa front. And so they threw the ball a lot in that game and came up short, obviously. But for this game plan here against the Eagles, I just think that you're going to see it's not going to be a 50-50 split. I think Ezekiel will steal their lead back, but there's just too many things that Tony Pollard can do. And he's such a weapon for Kellen Moore that he's got to be part of the game plan every single week. He's just too good of a player, not just as a runner, but as a pass catcher and what he can do in the passing game. So I think both of them are going to be significantly involved again. Down here, one of the biggest storylines this week is just the fact of, why is this Tony Pollard look like the better running back and the Cowboys are paying Ezekiel Elliott all this money, And so the fortunate thing for the Cowboys is that Zeke and Pollard do get along and they are very close. And I don't see them there being a rift in the locker room or anything. For me, looking at it from, a reporter's perspective, I kind of feel like, well, Sean Payton made it work for a little bit with Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara. Could that potentially work with Kellen Moore? Because he is a great play caller. I really do think he's an outstanding play caller. I think it's going to lead to him being a head coach in the near future. Obviously, the Eagles interviewed him in January for their head coaching position. So I think that he's just got a lot of weapons, and from week to week, we're just going to see different game plans, and that was not always the case with the Cowboys.
By the way, John, on Kellen Moore, from the outside looking in, he seems to be one of those hot candidates that is probably going to get a lot of head coaching interest sooner rather than later. Is Jerry aware of that? How does that work? Because obviously, when you have a young coach that everybody's looking at and everybody's saying all these wonderful things about, you don't necessarily want to lose them, but it's really hard to keep them unless you're going to fire your head coach, and you don't want to go down that route. How is he handling that aspect of it?
All right, so I'll tie it in with the Alvin Kamara, Mark Ingram thing, because obviously Sean Payton was the one that was running that show there and still is. Jerry doesn't like that he lost Sean Payton. He would love for Sean Payton to have been kind of that next guy in line. Yeah. So I find it interesting that Kellen gets in the situation, and if the offense continues to have the success they've had these first 2 weeks and things continue to head in that right direction, it's going to be hard for Jerry to let him go. And so Kellen had interest from Boise State for their head coaching job, and he ultimately didn't take it. Now, there are differing stories down here of why he didn't. Some people say that, well, there were certain things at Boise State that he didn't like, which makes, for me, is hard to believe, because that's like his alma mater, and he is the man down there. Like, he is the face of Boise State. Everybody down there knows who he is. Like, he does car commercials there. Like, I mean, everybody knows who Kellen Moore is in that part of the country. So then there's others that said that Jerry came in and made sure that Kellen Moore wasn't leaving. So things could get real interesting down here if he has a type of success, because I don't see Jerry being willing to let him go. And this isn't college football where you can have we'll make you the head coach in waiting. Yeah. They just don't do that at the pro level. So it's interesting you bring that up, because that could be a huge storyline as the season progresses, because, when Jerry's got a guy like that, if he thinks he's the next Sean Payton, it's going to be hard for Jerry to let him go out the door.
Yeah, Jason Garrett got some really nice salaries as the offensive coordinator before they made him the head coach. So Jerry has been down this road before and is willing to pay to keep his guy in place. All right, I'm a Hard Knocks fan. I'm well on record. Love the show. We'll see how this whole in-season thing with Carson Wentz in Indianapolis Colts works, but I'm a Hard Knocks guy. I thought it'd be cool this year because the Cowboys are smart. Jerry's the probably best promoter of his own franchise in the history of the National Football League. Yeah, I thought it was boring. The Cowboys don't have great personalities. They got players, but they don't have great personalities. So that's just my read on Hard Knocks. Did it have any effect on the Cowboys 2 games in? Because some people whine and moan after, Hard Knocks took us out of week, showed too much. It was a big distraction. And others seem to pick it up and run with it and have success with it. What's the verdict on Hard Knocks' effect on the Cowboys so far this year?
Yeah, I don't think it's much. And that, to your point, is just because there weren't many distractions from it, because it really wasn't as exciting as I think a lot of people were thinking it was going to be. I mean, just from my perspective, my plan going in was to write every night for those 5 episodes what were the best things from that. And after like the third one, I was like, I mean, it wasn't getting the readership that we were getting on the first few. You could just, I mean, in the business we're in right now, it's very clear when people are interested in something when they're not. We just have too many tools to measure that nowadays. And so you could tell as the episodes went on, there'd be bits and pieces in the episodes, but for an hour-long show, there just wasn't as much stuff as you were expecting. The first episode I thought was really interesting, with Dak getting injured and them having the behind the scenes in that. But as it went on, and I haven't had this confirmed, but my belief is that they just became, because the Cowboys, any team that does that, they're in on the editing process. And I think there were a lot of things that, were probably interesting and they just didn't make it in, and they edited it out. Because you go from allowing John Fossil to talk about vasectomies in depth, and that's on there. And then all of a sudden you just are not having these interesting storylines as the show's progressing. And so that's, Mike McCarthy's a guy that he wasn't doing a lot of mic'd up behind the scenes stuff in Green Bay. So he comes down here and he's just kind of like, we're going to be doing Hard Knocks now on top of this after we just had this, highly disappointing season. So to your point, it because it wasn't as interesting as probably a lot of people thought with storylines, things like that. I don't sense many distractions. I mean, heck, the last couple of episodes were about guys that really aren't even a factor on the team, with Isaac Alarcon and Azur Kamara, and a few other players that didn't make the roster. And so, I haven't seen an impact at all on this team.
All right, John, last one from me. I want to thank you for joining the show. Check out John's work at The Athletic. Does the best job, in my opinion, of covering the Dallas Cowboys. We haven't even gotten to Dak Prescott. All this talk, there's always so many storylines around the Cowboys. Obviously, Dak coming off the injury, that was probably the most compelling part of Hard Knocks, is them just showing what he went through and how difficult that injury was. Then he had a bit of a shoulder. Very short sample size, but it seems like from the outside looking in, same old Cowboys, 4th ranked offense, 27th ranked defense. They can score. They give up a lot of points. What's the context of that? Is that changing, or is it the Cowboys are going to, if they're going to win, they're going to outscore you?
Yeah, I think that's the way it is. I mean, if you were to look at their roster broken down by their salary, so much of this salary is invested in the offense. Jerry Jones is clearly a guy that wants to win with an offense, putting up points. And so what we were just talking about with Kellen Moore, and why Jerry will want to keep him around. One of the big things why Mike McCarthy wanted to keep Kellen on his staff and why Dak wanted Kellen Moore to stay around is because of, looking at the history of what's been going on in the league and that keeping that continuity between franchise quarterback and play caller. And that's why it'll be hard for them to allow Kellen Moore to walk out the door either. Cause it's like, you've put in all this time. Dak's the highest paid player in franchise history. Him and Kellen see eye to eye on a lot of things going back to, you go back to 2016, it was Kellen Moore that was supposed to be Tony Romo's backup. And then Kellen Moore gets hurt. And then that's the reason Dak how many offensive coordinators were like teammates with the quarterback? They are on the same page. And the way that this team's built and the direction I see them going, as long as Jerry Jones is owner, it's going to be very heavy offensive dominated. So as the Cowboys offense goes is how the Cowboys will go. You kind of look at it as the way that this is going to be, especially in a salary cap era, is that they're going to win with offense and have a defense that can be opportunistic. They're going to give up points, but get some takeaways here and there. And as through these first 2 weeks, they got 6 takeaways. That's how they're going to have to win. They just don't have enough of that talent on defense to think that they're going to be some dominant defense. So as opposed to being, like some of these previous Super Bowl winners that had a really good defense, I think you'd have to lean towards more of, maybe they need their defense to be like the way the Chiefs defense was, where, they're going to score a lot of points, but, be opportunistic. This isn't going to be the Chargers 17 points. I think to your point, Jody, earlier, some reffing had some issues in things to do with that as well. I don't think this is a defense that's going to be just shutting teams down. So yeah, the Cowboys are going to win. They're going to win with their offense.
All right, I've got an offensive question, and I'm going to ask you to put your scouting hat on for me, because the guy who's been surprisingly unproductive or underproductive in the first couple of weeks is a guy I want to ask you about. In watching Hard Knocks and following the Cowboys, I thought this could be a breakout year for Cedric Wilson, knowing full well he's your 4th wide receiver behind the big 3. Oh, Michael Gallup gets hurt. Cedric Wilson gets a chance. He gets to step up. Boise State kid. The offensive coordinator's got to love him. This is going to be a perfect fit. 6th round pick, breakout year. He didn't do anything last week. Hasn't in either of the first 2 weeks of the season. I thought he was a potential breakout candidate. They've got 2 guys at tight end who can both catch the ball. We talk all this time about 12 possessions here in Philadelphia because the Eagles have 2 good tight ends too. I think Cedric Wilson will decide how often that is the formation they use. Give me your scouting report on the kid. Is he what he is, a 6th round pick who's good but not great, or a potential breakout candidate?
Yeah, it's tough because of all the weapons to say that he's going to be a breakout candidate. I think that he can flash. He had a nice play last week where they threw to him kind of out in the flat. Dak did, and he ended up making like 4 guys miss. And so you see glimpses and things like that. If they're healthy, which even without Gallup, they relatively are healthy. Because you're going to throw the ball to Tony Pollard, you're going to throw it to Dalton Schultz and Blake Jarwin and Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. You can throw to Ezekiel Elliott. I just don't know that there would be enough touches for Cedric Wilson to have a big enough impact. And then especially, I think the matchups matter too. Like if Cedric Wilson was the starter week 1 and there wasn't Michael Gallup against Tampa when they were throwing the ball more, I think he would have made a bigger impact. So I think it's going to be more of a week-to-week thing. But it's clearly one of those things that they're happy to have that issue because there just is so many playmakers for Dak to get the ball to that you don't have to just kind of key on one guy. But it's interesting you bring up Cedric because Dak is a huge Cedric Wilson fan. Cedric's got a quarterback background, and so they see eye to eye on like a lot of things. And even before Michael Gallup got hurt, Dak was talking about randomly one day in camp at practice. He was like, because, Amari Cooper didn't do much in training camp. Michael Gallup missed some time and Cedric filled in and Dak just kept going on about how he's like, there isn't a drop off. Like when Cedric steps in there, like our offense keeps clicking and stuff. And we're kind of like, all right, well, we'll see it when it comes out on the field. So yeah, he hasn't had like a huge game yet, but he is the type of guy, if you fall asleep on him, though, he can make a big play here or there. He did it last year early in the season when he got some opportunity. So it remains to be seen.
We'll see if it is on Monday night against the Eagles. Jon, great stuff. We appreciate you coming on board. Thanks much. Enjoy the game on Monday.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me on.
Jon Machota, you can read him. The beauty of the Athletic is, yes, you can get it everywhere. Online, read up on the Cowboys prior to Monday night. Jon will give you some good background and information on the Eagles' opposition on Monday. All right, Mac and Mac guys coming back. Oh, you know what we got to do. Put a bow on the show for a Football Friday here on Birds 360.